Morning, everybody. This is the fourth in the Learn Performances series of Road to Recovery this year. So welcome again to joining us on analysing how businesses are responding and how the year is panning out as we move out of the COVID crisis and back into a new brave world. So today I'm very excited to be joined by Sarah Mason, who is the Chief People Officer at Foxtons. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Can you just remind us, can you tell us a little bit about Foxtons, what kind of size they are, and what actually being the Chief People Officer means? So what do you do, basically?
It's a great question. I get asked that regularly. What does the Chief People Officer do? And actually, it's all things people effectively. So my job is to make sure we've got the right talent, skills, headcount, structure in the business to make sure we achieve our objectives and our goals. Foxtons, we're London's leading estate agent. Most people who live in London will recognise our sale and letting signs or our Foxtons minis buzzing around. And we've got a headcount around 1,200 people in total.
1,200 people, and basically all in the southeast and London, yeah?
Yeah, all London and Surrey, all in the one place. So we've got a very strong brand. We're one of the most recognised estate agents. So people think that we're all over the UK, but we are in fact London and South East.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so and I will just reintroduce myself, and then I'll explain the structure of today's conversation. So I'm Tom Holmes, founding director of Brand Performance. We've been doing these sessions on the impact of the COVID crisis and then the recovery for the last year. I think we've done 28 of them with leaders and people leaders from global, central, and important businesses. And we've tried to cover as many sectors as we possibly can. And it's really exciting, Sarah, that you're going to be talking about the impact on such an important sector, actually, today. So what we're planning to do today is to break the session down into three different areas. Firstly, what are the challenges? What have the challenges been? Secondly, what opportunities have emerged from COVID? I'm always really keen that we kind of balance out the obvious difficulties we've seen with actually new thought and new opportunities which have emerged out of unwanted and awful 12 months, and then finally how Foxtons and how Sarah is responding to those. So the three groups: what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and then how we are responding to them, Sarah, if that's okay with you. And so therefore I would like to start with talking a bit about the challenges which you have seen. And guys, you'll notice that there's the question and answer box at the bottom, so please pop any questions into chat and I'll pick those up as we go. So Sarah, what have the challenges been? Can you give us a kind of summary and some detail?
Yeah, there's been a handful actually. Probably the biggest one, which is shared with many, I'd imagine, is this challenge around not being able to gather in person. And for a high kind of performance culture, very sales focused culture, that's quite challenging. So this challenge around how can we maintain our culture, maintain this kind of really vibrant social culture when we're not allowed to gather in person. And we've had quite an unusual ride of it in property, because whilst we were shut for the first lockdown, we were actually kept open for the second two. So things did improve, but there's still been lots of restrictions around gathering in person. That's been a real challenge. We've got a real bunch of social people who work for us who like hanging out together. And that's been a challenge because it has an impact on our culture and how we train people and how we upskill people. We generally hire most of our estate agents at entry level and then onboard them and train them up, lots of intense training. And it's challenging if they can't do that when they're not gathering in person for big training sessions. So how do we onboard and train people up in that way? So that was the first challenge. And then the second challenge, I'd imagine, may not be common to everyone, potentially for retail, where you've got two different groups of people. You've got people out in the front who are allowed to stay open in the offices and people in back office who aren't. So you've got kind of two groups of staff. And how do we manage that, where we've got some people working from home, but for us, a lot of people still actually then going to the office, because lockdowns 2 and 3 we were open, and how do we navigate that a bit better? And that's been really challenging too.
Interesting. So those are the two main challenges. Is it still the case that that you've got that differential with the front offices open and the back offices kind of more able to be working in different locations?
Yeah, very much so. Like most companies, our back office functions, so classic your HR, legal, finance, IT, have largely been working from home during the lockdowns, second and third lockdowns, um, and and that's been working okay. But what we're starting to do, like most companies, are starting to bring people back in line with legislation changes. Another challenge we've had in property is that we've almost had three different sets of legislation to think about. So when we have our branches out in the front, if you think about a classic Foxtons branch, if you're in London, you'll have walked past them a number of times, like glass boxes on the high street. Half of the office is a retail space, effectively, because of people coming in, members of the public, with a reception area, but the other half is an office. So there's actually two different sets of legislation to look at there. You've got the office and contact centre legislation, where they don't need to wear a mask, but then you've got the retail space where they do need to wear a mask. And you can imagine members of the public walking past, seeing our guys sitting at the desk thinking they're not wearing masks, but they're working in a shop. Well, actually, they're in an office. So you've had quite a lot of complexity around the types of legislation, not just the government, but the different types of legislation in the environments, but also our customers sometimes have a different set of expectations from the government guidelines. They might want us to behave a certain way because that's what they want, as opposed to that's what's stipulated. So that's been a challenge in itself as well.
And this legislation is not coming in a traditional manner of a statement of intent, a 6-month consultation period, a discussion, a thinking, and then an implementation period of 9 or 8 months. In fact, if you squash those all down, removed the months and talked about the days, that's what we've all seen, really. And I imagine legislation has changed several times for you, Sarah, during the last year.
Yeah, there's been the two sections we've been looking at: the health and safety side. How do we keep our staff and customers, safe? It's really important, alongside those different legislations I mentioned. And then secondly, you've got the employee side of it as well. The employee legislation around, furlough, holiday. How does that all fit together? So quite a lot. And like you say, it hasn't been neatly consulted and packaged up. It's often drip fed, usually on a Friday night. When everyone's ready to go for the weekend, you'll have a little bit of legislation being dropped in your lap. So we've had to work at pace with that. We found it very useful, actually. We use the HR Inform service, whereby they send us regular updates on what's happening, which has been invaluable for the team. But just keeping on top of it has been a challenge in itself. And like most companies, we've used an employee-led health and safety committee. So we have representatives from all around the business on our health and safety committee, and whenever legislation changes, we get the committee together and say, how are we interpreting this? What do we do? How do we make sure we're going above and beyond? And that's been really useful.
Brilliant. And presumably something you're going to retain in future, because actually, that are, I think, because many of our businesses' response to legislative changes has been slow, because it can be, and complicated, because it always affects lots of different people. But that committee, I imagine, is actually a really useful device for processing new rules and stuff like that rapidly.
Yeah, it means we can move at pace, and at Foxtons we always kind of move at pace here. We're a very fast-paced organisation.
Yep.
And it also means that people feel consulted, and they feel they're in control of their environment, and that's really important.
Very interesting. That's really great. So I've noted down the challenges. The one which I'm most interested in, haven't picked up on yet, but I think we're going to pick up through the rest of the session, is actually maintaining that vibrant culture. I think that's really fascinating. I think that's the challenge which many of our businesses are now facing, because we'll be a year in, and trying to keep everybody and keeping everybody feeling that they're part of an energetic and exciting business is tougher without the face-to-face and getting the ability to gather in person. So I'm hoping, Sarah, you're going to pick up on that as we progress on to the second part of our section, which is no longer the challenges, but the opportunities which the crisis have brought. So what are your thoughts in this area, Sarah?
Well, opportunities. We were super lucky, because as an industry, we were, like I say, kept open after the first lockdown. So there's an opportunity there. Very busy market for property. Lots of people wanting to move homes, either because they suddenly realised they don't have to commute so far if they're working from home, so they can live a bit further out from their job, or they want some home working space. Or frankly, they've been sitting in their house for a year and they're sick of the sight of their four walls. They just wanted to change.
Yeah.
So lots of people looking to move. along with the stamp duty holiday. So this market suddenly got busy for us. There's an commercial opportunity for us, and there's an opportunity for us to look at what's happening with the pandemic to accelerate some things we'd already put in place. And that was really for us around digital learning and virtual networking. Historically, we've been a very present culture. We gather in person, and suddenly that flipped on its head. And that was quite a good thing for us, because actually it's quite disruptive sometimes to all meet in person. And I know we're just a London-based company. I've worked in global companies where I'd regularly have to fly over to Sydney for 2 weeks, and it's knackering, isn't it? And always, exhausting. And lots of companies now adjusting to that, saying, well, I don't have to fly to Sydney. And for our London guys, they haven't got to spend a day schlepping across to head office. We can actually do more things virtually, and that's suddenly become a real bonus. So it accelerated this opportunity, accelerated our digital learning journey. So we've been trying to move from this very traditional approach of in-person training, classroom-based stuff. We even used to call them lesson plans, kind of very, very traditional approach to development and engagement, to suddenly this virtual way of doing it. And as long as we had the tech in place, which we got in place quite early on, the rest of it it operated in two ways. When I think of change management, there's kind of two ends of a spectrum. So you think of the spectrum of change management, you've got top-down directive change management. So putting an IT system in, it comes from the top. You've probably got a Gantt chart in there somewhere. It's very directive. And then you've got what I call emergent or facilitated change. It bubbles up from the bottom of the organization, from all around, and actually it manages itself. We had a bit of both. So we did some top-down stuff around how we fed out digital content, how we fed out wellbeing content, learning content. That was very managed from the top. How do we, on the L&D team, how do we manage the way we feed people content, digital content? How do we give them content to consume? And that was quite interesting, actually. We did lots of different blended approach around clinics, people having expert hours, where we'd have senior people in the business with 200 people asking questions, super useful, not dissimilar to your webinars, but doing it internally. How do we do that top down? That worked really brilliantly, having a timetable. Everyone started expecting to consume their learning and engagement in a different way. But then this facilitative piece, it just emerged naturally. People, for instance, planning events virtually themselves. We had lots of quizzes happening. We had my talent acquisition team, for instance, they're a sporty bunch. They used to go and do online workouts together. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than working out with my colleagues. I mean, I'd absolutely hate that. I like to work out without anyone there, preferably. So, they would actually go and because they used to go to the gym together, they just automatically switched to virtual. We'll work out together online. And we saw pockets of that throughout our business, because our guys are very social, our teams are social. They'd automatically organize themselves into their own little networks. So we had lots of kind of unofficial, informal networking going on virtually, lots of fun. And then we had some very, very top-down formal approaches happening that we could control around how the digital learning took place, but also things like diversity and inclusion events. We wanted to make sure they continued despite the pandemics. We had the LGBTQ plus network last week had a virtual wine tasting that went down really well, as I'm sure you can imagine. Everyone got sent a little box of wine to taste. That went brilliantly. We had Black History Month. We had some great speakers virtually. So we carried on with D&I events and digital learning, very planned, but allowed this emergent networking to carry on, which worked really well.
And how did you resource this team, Sarah? Because this is new stuff. Presumably, you used to have a team who would work on the content, etc., for your physical get-togethers and networking events. But this is really different. This is an online version. So how did you pull that team together? How did you manage that team to deliver this?
It was actually using the resource we had. We actually got additional resource in to train the L&D team up to understand the new skills and tools they'd need around digital learning, editing, the different ways of using Canva, the different ways of editing videos. I had a very talented team to begin with. I was lucky, got a really great L&D team who were massively proactive and just wanted to try out new things. The biggest sticking block was actually we're used to doing very glossy, perfect looking training. And you can be a bit guerrilla with your digital training. It doesn't have to look so good. It doesn't have to be perfect or beautiful. You can have lots of drop-in sessions. And it was shifting the business to not expect beautifully managed videos, but say, actually, it doesn't have to be a beautifully managed video. We're going to get 200 estate agents on a call with our expert on, the conveyancing process, and let them ask some questions. And it will be fine. It doesn't need to be chaotic either. It can be managed and facilitated well. So shifting people, both the L&D team to think differently about the way they delivered content, but get our workforce to understand that it doesn't have to be one thing. There's lots of ways of learning and engaging. And they switched pretty quickly, actually, because the same way they were used to switching their social lives, switch virtual, it was pretty seamless. And it meant that we could try things that we would have had more resistance to before. It was a real opportunity for us to try new things. So we've put loads of things out there, expert hours, podcasts we hadn't done before. And that made loads of sense. If you think about the amount of time an estate agent spends in their car, driving to and from work, driving around, podcasts can be really useful, and a great way for them to learn from their peers. So we resourced it by using the current team we had, but getting some expert training in on how we could upskill the L&D team, but also dispersing it. You know, for instance, it doesn't have to be the old school L&D sage on the stage. I'm the person with all the wisdom, I deliver the wisdom. We wanted to move away from that, and we went to all our experts in the business and said, you know, let's get you involved in a clinic or drop in or short video, and used our internal experts, and that's worked brilliantly.
And how have you, because there's a balance, a mix between canned material and material which is live and presented live. How do you feel that one should be doing that differential? So which bits fit best for which areas, and what's the different responses?
I think the answer to that is it depends, actually. It depends on the individual learner, and it depends on the topic. Some topics need a bit of theory. So for instance, if you're teaching a bunch of brand new estate agents about anti-money laundering, you cannot get that wrong. It's really important. It's compliance. So compliance-based lends itself more to traditional, you know, online content and tests, because you have to check it. Whereas actually, if you go down the route of knowledge being socially constructed, because knowledge can either be an object that you pass to someone, or it can be socially constructed through dialogue and learning, then actually there's some great things for drop-in clinics and for expert hours that is actually more suited to questions. So it depends on the topic. Frankly, it also depends on the person delivering it. For some people, the thought of them being live for an hour would scare the hell out of them, and they wouldn't be very good at it either. So why do that? You know, you need to make sure you're choosing the right people for that. So if you've got the topic suits a live discussion, as in it's not compliance led, and you've got the right person delivering it, they've got the knowledge and they're comfortable with it being live and accepting a bit of chaos. In the same way with this session now, every now and again the tech might go a bit wobbly. You've got to be okay and not panic too much. That's how it is. And we've kind of muddled through that a little bit, but we've had to take people on a journey, because some people have been a bit, no, there's no way you're getting me on a webinar, but quite a few people now are very comfortable with it.
And then, so I get it. So you moved your current team, the learning team, etc., to be using these new tools and channels. And did you start a model where you also got participants from the business to contribute to these events? The kind of one of our viewers is talking about an ambassador model of kind of volunteers who from their business who were coming to support in getting the content and those events. Is that something you explored, Sarah?
We've very much done that for the diversity and inclusion events. So the D&I events, our different communities are run by the community. So the LGBTQ plus event, the wine tasting, was set up, created and run by community members, and nothing to do with the L&D team at all. They're run by the communities, and that's worked brilliantly. It's an opportunity to develop people. It's an opportunity for people to learn a new skill if they haven't presented before. And we're pretty forgiving. If someone's presenting for the first time, everyone's really rooting for them to do a great job. It's a really good platform for them to practice it in a safe way, if that makes sense, rather than a public forum where you can get things wrong. So we do have quite a few things done by the workforce as opposed to L&D. We have experts for topics that need to be specific. So you'll have an expert on conveyancing, so the legal stuff. You'll have an expert on, anti-money laundering or compliance. But for other things where you can have a bit more flex, we will absolutely use other members of the teams for that.
Interesting. So, I mean, you were talking about the central challenge being the inability to gather in person and replace the vibrant culture. So how far do you think the measures you've talked about and these online things have done that? And how far is there still a gap which needs addressing, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely a gap. Certainly for us, I appreciate every culture is different. For Foxtons, there's no real replacement for gathering in person. So we have done lots of virtual events, but everyone's missing their colleagues a little bit. A good example would be, we have these things called Friday meetings. They happen once a month, not on every Friday, weirdly, but historically they're called our Friday meetings. And what that used to look like every month, in a division where you'd have, say, 10 of our branches would all gather together in one of our offices, normally in one of our basements, crammed in, talk about the figures, who's done brilliantly, celebrate success, all high energy. We can't do that, we can't, but we still want to have the celebration of success and the champagne, frankly, because why would you not? So what we've done is we've taken those virtually, and we've done things like sending drinks to offices or pizzas to offices, and you get everyone dialing in to their division. So they still get to see their buddies in different offices. They get to hear who's doing well. They get to hear a shout out if they've done brilliantly. But it's still a little bit, of a poor relation to meeting in person. But that's about as far as we can take it. That's we've got as far as we can take it, which is we get the elements of the celebration, the knowledge sharing, the champagne and the drinks and the pizza, but we're all still looking forward to going back.
It's very interesting. I think this is the challenge, actually. I think that we've all been working really hard at moving things online, having those virtual meetings, getting people to participate, etc. But nothing yet, which I've heard of, fully replaces the gathering in person. Actually, people really miss that, and I don't know how we're going to resolve that as the pandemic increases, because I imagine large proportion of your staff are younger people, and therefore the vaccination out of the problem is going to take longer for your team than some others.
Yeah, we've got a very young workforce. Absolutely, they'll be bottom of the queue for the vaccines. They're all desperate to meet up. And actually, to be fair, lots of them are actually in our front office working. Unlike back office, they're actually going to work every day. Estate agents can't do the job from home. They effectively do it from someone else's home. They're doing viewings a lot of the time. We've got a retail presence. But yeah, they're very keen. They like coming to head office. They like the events. We did do one event actually, which again was it was a substitute. We have our negotiator awards every year to recognise the top performers, and we did that. We sent boxes to all the offices with the trophies, and we had a big video to make sure everyone still felt they were getting recognised. Funny enough, 2 weeks before it, someone in the organisation sent me an email to say, what were we doing about the awards this year? I was really gunning for winning one. And to be fair, he won one of our top awards. He's a top performer. So I'm not surprised he was. And I said, don't worry, they're coming. You're going to find out about that in the next 2 weeks. And he was delighted then to get his award and get the recognition. So we still replaced it with something. But there's again, everyone wanted to get together, in their fancy outfits and celebrate.
Yes. So tell me a bit more about the, because you presumably, given the busyness, you've had to hire a lot of new people, and indeed new trainees and people who are new to the business as well. So how have you managed to support them in their experience? Because in the past, that experience would be very much people-led and contact-led. So how has their experience changed during the pandemic?
Yeah, the onboarding has changed dramatically. And again, going back to this opportunity, accelerating our previous work, we were already shifting to a blended learning approach. And we previously had a 5-day induction, which was known in the industry. It won awards. It was, regularly talked about, and a lot of people would like to poach people from Foxtons after they've done their 2 years national service at Foxtons. They get swooped in and taken off because they've been upskilled so well. But my view was actually 5 days in a room isn't an effective way of learning. No one can retain that much information in one hit, especially when it's all brand new content. So we were shifting already to making that a more elongated approach. So now the induction is actually a half day. We've got one happening today. We have to get people in so they can, 2 things, get their laptops, get their kit, learn about how the digital learning works. We want them to really understand how to get the most out of their content they're going to get, but also they need to pick up cars. So we need to talk them through, their cars. It's really important for health and safety. We have a strong fleet induction. So we have a half day now, and then the rest of their onboarding over the next 3 to 6 months is mapped out on a learning path, digital content at the right times, but also what's worked really well is using our managers in all the branches to do some of the heavy lifting, frankly. So we've just launched what's called the Foxtons formula, this a sales process. And what that looks like is every Wednesday, the managers get the content through, and that requires people to watch a video beforehand. And then the manager runs a session, which has all been drafted for them. They've got everyone to watch the video, they ask these questions, they do role plays with the groups. And so the manager's running the session every Wednesday in all the branches. And the managers have really enjoyed it because actually it gives their job variety and it's a really nice thing to do. And it means we've dispersed it across the organisation. So we've got a good skill base out there. It's just a bit of fun. And it means people are learning in person in their branches as well as digital. So we've really tightly managed that one, because every week there's a different set of training notes going out to the managers with videos saying, this is what your people need to watch, this is what you need to tell them and do the session with them, and these are the observational sheets, so you can then reinforce the training afterwards. So it's very planned and managed, but it means that it's not just L&D delivering it, all parts of the business are.
That's very interesting, and because that's quite ambitious to launch a whole new formula during the pandemic, but that must be a mark of your confidence that the online and the blend with using managers as training staff, etc., is kind of working and effective.
They've really embraced it, and we've had great feedback from it. What it did was pull together lots of different ways of doing a process in one, making it consistent so it's easy for people to understand. We're such a busy market at the moment, a busy property market. We want to help people get up to speed really quickly, so we need to make it efficient, and consistency can help with that. Having one way of doing things rather than lots of different ways of doing things, it's a bit muddled. So people have embraced it. Actually, they're enjoying the sessions, because they enjoy the sessions. Previously they haven't enjoyed training because it means they've got to do lots of work, whereas now we'll say we'll do the work for you, we'll do the thinking for you, we'll do all the planning, we'll give you the stuff, you just need to stand up and do X, Y and Z. That works for them.
Okay, so nobody asked for these challenges. We would have, you know, it's been very challenging in so many different ways over the last year. We've struggled through and made ways to solve each of the problems which has been thrown at us as HR professionals, and then we found things which are tools which work to one extent or another. But how much of this stuff, Sarah, do you think is going to change Foxtons going forward? So how much of this stuff is actually better than the old stuff we used to use, and what do you see sticking, and what do you see going back to the old methods when we get a chance?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and I think about it all the time. Actually, what are we going to keep and what do we want to get back? We're desperate to get back to in-person events. I mean, we really are, whether it's award ceremonies, whether it's, parties, whether it's socializing, training sessions. There's nothing like people gathering, having a coffee with each other and sharing ideas. We're definitely wanting to bring that back.
Yeah.
Things that we'll keep is this blended learning, this way of engaging people and developing them in a very blended way has worked brilliantly. And like I say, initially there was a bit of resistance, but training's in the classroom, right? Well, no, training is in the classroom, but learning happens everywhere. And getting people to understand they can learn really efficiently and effectively through a variety of methods, far better than getting everyone in a classroom. I mean, it was holding us back a little because it's hugely time consuming, it's very labor intensive and often quite disruptive. You're forcing, this kind of training on someone when they're not ready to learn it. If it's digital or it's done in a peer related way, it's far more effective. So that's going to continue. It's worked brilliantly.
Far more effective, you're saying, actually, than previous approach. I mean, there's an inclusivity question, I think, as well, which is that, particularly for companies who are employing people who have other challenges, maybe part-timers, this kind of thing, then actually attending the learning sessions in person can be challenging. You can miss, we've all monitor them, how do we get them through the training, all this kind of stuff, which actually the digital methods and the blended routes really solves, because actually those people can watch them at their own time and pace.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of pseudoscience about learning. I've heard lots of things quoted at me. The cone of learning I've seen a few times about how people retain information. And Bloom's taxonomy is very popular, but that's been highly criticised as well. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is have a scientific approach and offer learning that sticks and support someone to do their job. We shifted our L&D purpose. It used to be very much around, when I joined, we deliver classroom training. And I was like, really, you know, that we've got to move on that. Now our purpose is we enable learning to drive performance, which is a completely different thing. We're not training people, you know, so they passively consume content. We're actively engaging them in how they learn information that underpins how they do their job well. And often that's when they need it. We can't dictate the timings on quite a lot of that. It depends on when they need it. It depends on what type, how quickly they develop. Everyone develops at different paces, and it has to be accessible when they need it.
Yes, and I quite like the idea of the separation of the two functions. So quite a lot of corporate events and get-togethers would be half training, half compliance updates, half all that stuff, and then half about driving culture and people and the you know, creating a vibrant culture. But actually, these things, you know, the first half of that, if delivered through digital routes, etc., everyone coming has already got to a certain level, so you can cut that part out and focus on actually the key function of getting teams together, which is for them to be able to network and create that vibrant way of working.
Exactly. I think, funny enough, the networking piece is interesting because I'm lucky enough, I'm part of the CIPD's HR network and the leader network. And every 2 weeks we have our CHRO network, closed group of 8 of us, and kind of navigate the pandemic together, because it's, you know, the same things are happening to all businesses. It's interesting to share our ideas. And that's worked beautifully virtually. It's not a problem. We still have great conversations. And because the tech is in place now to have, you can go from a big group with lots of content to suddenly a small group where you're sharing ideas about it. The tech supports us now in having really good quality conversations, whether it's about culture, whether it's about skills. It's suddenly working much better.
And so then if you do end up meeting in person with that team, presumably you'd focus actually more on getting to know those people, understanding them, just you know, making it more of a social and networking conversation than actually having to do the content, because the content's been covered on the online conversations.
Exactly.
And I think this is a really interesting discovery, I think, to online channels, which is actually separating off those two functions and using get-togethers more focused on actually what their purpose is, which is not the delivery of content, etc., but more about just getting people to understand their colleagues and the culture.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because even though, like I say, on the network I'm on, we use that time to have some social chat. A lot of the time when you do virtual events, it's always straight to business quite quickly, and there isn't always that much chat at the end either. And that bit does get missed, you know, that kind of, you know, the water cooler conversations, I guess, is what they're termed. So you do get quite a lot of business focused conversations and interesting learning, but I guess people do miss out the social piece. That's a shame.
Yes, I think that's true. Brilliant. So what are your key thoughts about the next 6 months? So what's happening at Foxtons? What should we expect, and what should your colleagues who've joined us today expect over the next 6 months?
Next 6 months, well, we're going to be busy because the property market is full on at the moment. So we're going to be hopefully making the most of that. We're really hectic with our sales and lettings at the moment, that those parts of our business. There's lots of people looking to move. So I think the people teams will be supporting that. Really key. How do we help our front office teams, you know, do well in their jobs?
Mm-hmm. And I understand that you've really been looking at engagement this year as well, and actually your measures have changed rather significantly. Could you tell us about that? So the overall outcome of all of this, how is, you say it's great, Sarah, but you kind of would. What did the team, what were your team
I would say it's great. I always say it's great. So it's a good point. I definitely would say things are great. That's my thing.
Yes.
Well, the engagement survey is always interesting for us to see how we get on, and we actually get high levels of response. Our engagement survey last last December, we did it right at the end of 2020 because it was a good time to find out how people had found 2020. Our engagement survey response rate was 89%. So lots of people are happy to have their say. We can capture most of the organisation in that. And I was fully expecting our engagement score to go down for two reasons. First of all, it was pretty high to start with. We measure engagement across 5 questions on a Likert scale and look at how many people agree with those statements. And we previously got 83%, which is really, really high for an engagement score of that type. And I was expecting with the pandemic, that was going to drop considerably, and actually edged up. It went 84%, which I was very pleased to see at the end of 2020. To get an engagement score going up, I thought was brilliant. So we measure our engagement in a number of ways: longitudinally, so year on year. We measure it, what did that year look like? What did that year look like? And we also measure it cross-sectionally. So within the same time period, we compare different groups. And when we looked at different groups, the different D&I communities, they'd shifted, because previously we'd had significant differences across those groups in engagement, which wasn't good. We'd seen now last year for the first time there was no significant difference across our different D&I communities, high engagement across all, which is what we wanted to see, because we put a lot of work into our D&I strategy and it was paying off clearly. So I think I lost a bet with my CEO, because I did say I reckon our engagement score is going down and we'll see a significant difference between furloughed staff and those that hadn't been. And I was wrong on both counts, and quite happy to be proved wrong. Actually, it was quite a nice thing to be proved wrong on.
That's really interesting. And is there anything you can attribute that to? I mean, what are your key tips for the rest of us on achieving that? Why is it higher?
I think we definitely have to consider ourselves lucky that our market was kept open, and lots of industry haven't. So if you work in hospitality, that's a challenging, industry to work in right now. We were lucky, the property market was first of all kept open, and secondly was boosted by the stamp duty holiday. So, I think we need to be grateful for that, really. So that's probably going to help us with our engagement score. But we did underpin it with communication, engagement, learning. So there's quite a lot of stuff we did in the lead up to that to make sure that throughout the whole year, to make sure we're keeping people engaged and retaining our staff. But I appreciate that some of it's also underpinned by the market we're in. I can imagine other markets struggling through no fault of their own because they're in a tough time.
So the engagement of your team, the motivation, the training, keeping them all as happy as possible and as motivated as possible is presumably business critical to Foxtons.
Yeah.
All the HR, administrative and other activities and stuff like that are necessary to Foxtons. Now, how much of your time, Sarah, and how much has your time changed from focusing on technical questions about HR and retention and individuals and all that stuff to actually engaging the team? How do you blend your time between supporting the, are we talking about 20% sat on thinking about the team, etc., or has it changed at all during the pandemic? And what proportion are you spending on strategy versus administration and keeping things going?
I've definitely done more operational, tactical stuff in the last year than I have done in my career, purely around legislation, because you can't put a foot wrong, particularly as a PLC and a very well recognised one. So I've definitely spent more time on health and safety than I've ever done before last year, which is the right thing to do. So legislation, health and safety, compliance was a strong feature, more so than any other year I've had. But because I've always worked, even before Foxtons, I worked 20 odd years in the recruitment industry, very sales focused. I've always worked in sales driven organizations. So engagement's always been front and center. It's never not been. If you work in very sales focused, service led industries that aren't product based, they're service based, it's always about engaging the front line. It's really, really important. Nothing's more important than getting your sales teams doing a great job. So people are always at the heart of that. So I don't think that bit's changed, but I've definitely shifted to having more time on the legislation piece too.
Right. But what you're kind of saying to me, you've kind of muffed the question. You're saying more of both, really, Sarah.
I know it's been really busy. I honestly, I've never worked so hard. It's been so hectic. I didn't think I could find any more hours in the day. And I think, it's been and I'm not alone. I know lots of HR professionals will be just as shattered as I am. I know, frankly, it's been a very busy, year or so. It has been a busy time for HR, really, really, really busy, because it seems like there's nothing that can get dropped. You need to keep people engaged. You need to meet health and safety and compliance. You can't just say I'll do one or the other. They have to both happen. What I have done is try to use tools to support it. So we introduced Open Blend which is a really brilliant digital coaching platform that looks at objective setting as well as well-being, and that kind of thing, really helping our managers to have great conversations around well-being, motivation, ability to manage stress, as well as performance. So dropping stuff like that in the business was a great idea, because it effectively made something that would have taken a long time to train people, it happened almost overnight. So I did use some clever techniques to get things over the line, to save me a bit of time too.
So the I've got a question which I'm going to talk about in a second, but I just, before we finish on that, so Sarah, how are you managing your own time? This crisis has been a HR-led crisis. All of us are finding that the HR activities in every area are much more significant than they've ever been before. Sounds like you've been putting in the hours. How are you? How do you balance that to make sure that you personally aren't being overloaded by the work?
I probably got that wrong last year because I chose to study as well. So I did some studying last year. I did a postgraduate diploma last year. I figured if I couldn't go out and there was nothing to do, I may as well, get another qualification under my belt, because I'm a bit of a serial student. I absolutely love studying. I know, I'm a bit of a geek. So I went and did my Financial Times Pearson course. It's a level 7 on non-exec director studies, very much governance and finance based, which required a 3-hour finance exam at the end, which nearly gave me a heart attack, but I learned a lot. So I have to say, I probably did take on a bit too much last year. Studying in the midst of a busy job probably wasn't my smartest move, but it's over now and I'll get my weekends back.
Well, yes, it does sound like you've been compensating for a lack of social with more work, with your CIPD role and your very busy and complicated organization being busier than ever and doing that course. Well done. That is amazing. Now, I've got one specific question which has just come in, which is, are you making any changes? Are you planning changes to your recognition strategy and tools to keep people engaged and motivated moving forward? So have you found that you've actually had to think differently about recognition strategy and tools in the new reality?
We had to, yeah, that's a great question. We had to shift because we normally have high performer trips. So we take people on twice a year. They are great fun, quite lively. And we couldn't do those because we can't take people away. So instead of those last year, we did a financial based incentive instead for our sales teams. So they could hit targets and get bonuses to compensate for the lack of trips. We've got a whole new plan for our incentives, which we haven't launched yet, so I can't tell you. It's top secret, but it's going to be absolutely brilliant. And I think once we gather in person again, people are going to love it. We've got a really good plan for some new incentives moving forward.
Right, but the key thing is that you have been having to think about that again. You've put in interim measures, which is the cash bonuses, etc., and now you've developed something exciting which you're going to launch. And when are you intending to launch that approximately, Sarah? Is that coming in the summer kind of thing?
It'll come in the summer. It's actually our 40th year, Foxtons. We need to start celebrating our 40th year in Foxtons. This year is our 40th birthday. So we're going to be launching it in conjunction with that.
Brilliant. And that, I think that's really interesting. So I think that, obviously we all need to develop our own new incentive schemes, but I think the timing is what's more important. In the summer, as we come out of this, actually, we've all put in our interim things, but if we can think of something new and exciting, that's the takeaway I'm going to take from this conversation, Sarah, which is I'm going to think in my business, what is the new recognition and reward methodology for the new year, and then try and start thinking about launching that in the summer, because I do think that we've asked a lot from our staff over the last 12 months. And I do think refreshing and changing the way we recognize them is kind of critical, probably.
Yeah, people have had a really tough time, haven't they? I think we're all accepting of a tough year. People have either had personal challenges, with issues around, relatives getting ill, or they've had professional challenges, work has been difficult, or, people have been on furlough, different industries have had really tough times with it. I think everyone's, really had a really busy and tough time of it. So if we can come out into the summer when things open up with some more fun incentives, and absolutely it's where we're at.
Brilliant. That is my big takeaway, Sarah. Well, there's a whole bunch of takeaways, which I'm not going to go through because we're nearly out of time. I'd like to thank you for what was a great and really insightful talk this morning. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all our audience for taking time out of their day to come and join us today to get some cross business tips on the HR side. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day and rest of the week and a great bank holiday.